He is considered one of the greatest heroes of the War of 1812. His statue towers over the Niagara River, still pointing at his adversaries. Universities, even churches, still bear the name of Major General Sir Isaac Brock.
There's an Anglican church in the village of Queenston that's called St. Saviour's. And the Savior is not Christ. The Savior is Brock.
Yet before the war is 6 months old, he is dead. In just 2 battles, this leader forged alliances so crucial and gained victories so audacious, he became more than a man. He became a legend. Today, peaceful relations between Canada and the United States are taken for granted. Yet this relationship would not exist without events that transpired 2 centuries ago on the same land, but in a very different world. In 1812, the United States is a young country of just 7 million. Detroit is the end of the earth. The First Nations are powerful, as feared as they are respected. The remote British outpost known as Upper Canada is commanded by a soldier named Isaac Brock, a warrior without a war.
In Europe, Bonaparte threatens the British Empire, yet I'm stuck here without a chance for glory or fame.
That is about to change. In 1812, war between Britain and the United States seems inevitable. The Americans want Britain out of North America, in part because the British seized sailors from U.S. ships and forced them to serve in the British Navy.
Some of them were Royal Navy deserters. Others were simply British-born, people with English, Irish, Scots, Welsh accents who maybe had emigrated to the United States. Some 7,000 sailors were taken from American ships, so it was a fairly large problem.
The British used the sailors to feed their war against Napoleon. They also refused to accept that anyone can ever forsake the duties of a British subject. The Americans think this is a slap in the face of their newfound sovereignty. One former president brashly predicts a war in Canada will be easy to win.
Thomas Jefferson, he said that the capture of Canada, at least as far as Quebec, would be nothing but a mere matter of marching.
Isaac Brock fears Jefferson could be right. Canada is filled with recent immigrants from the United States.
They've signed an oath of allegiance to His Majesty, but will they fight their former countrymen?
The majority of Upper Canadians were American-born. Would they pick up arms and fight against their former countrymen?
Brock has a plan to defend Upper Canada, and it suits his ambition to be in the fight.
I must see service, or quit the army altogether.
Brock seems to have felt that he was kind of being left out of where the main action was. He was very interested in getting promoted, and getting promoted rapidly.
But the odds are against Brock. He has only 2,000 trained soldiers and a handful of volunteer militia to defend the entire frontier. Brock's superior, Sir George Prevost, counsels caution.
General Prevost is a good man. He does not wish to gamble his forces on an attack on the Americans. But fortune favors the bold.
The British plan through the whole war was to get the Americans to the negotiating table to end the war.
Although the British continue to hope for peace, comments from the American president, James Madison, make it clear to Brock that war is coming.
My dear brothers, there is no mistaking it. President Madison's speech smells of gunpowder. We should prepare for war.
Brock had a lot to do, but he knew it was only a matter of time before the United States would declare war on Britain and that British North America would become a target.
Sensing the inevitable, Prevost orders Brock to seek allies among the local Aboriginal peoples.
Native alliances for the British forces in British North America were important. They could compensate for the fact that they had too few troops.
Sir, as it is probable that war may result from the present state of affairs, it is very desirable to ascertain the degree of cooperation that you and your friends might be able to furnish.
This is Fort St. Joseph. These ruins once housed a crucial British fur trading and military outpost near the shores of Lake Huron. It is also just 4 hours by canoe from Brock's first target, the American Fort Mackinac in Michigan. One of Brock's letters reaches this crucial location, and a plan is set in motion.
Our forces should gather with our Indian friends here at Fort St. Joseph. Their objective is here at Fort Mackinac.
Brock believes a victory at Mackinac is essential to creating a First Nations alliance.
This would show that even at the most distant American post, the British could overpower the Americans, and therefore the British were likely to win the war.
On June 18, 1812, the United States declares war. Brock is ready. On July 15th, a small company of British infantry and 300 native warriors leave Fort St. Joseph. They land at Mackinac just before dawn.
Our assault party knew exactly where to attack. Our fur-trading allies had been there many times.
Mackinac Island is small, but that makes it easier to defend. There are steep cliffs, more than 100 feet high.
An approach from the lake is foolish. The steep embankment protects the fort. Instead, the British drag 2 cannons through the bush. On the heights beyond the fort, the guns are aimed at the American magazine, filled with gunpowder. The British send a messenger to the fort. The Americans surrender immediately. Brock's army has the first victory of the war. Not a single shot is fired. But how was such a stunning outcome even possible?
Our first victory was without bloodshed, with good reason. The young American commander did not know his country was at war.
I think that the First Nations were impressed. The British showed that they had enough power to overwhelm the Americans.
But Brock knows he'll need to do more to convince the local Aboriginals to stay on side.
We took the Americans by surprise at Mackinac. Our next challenge will be more confrontational.
The war is less than a month old, and the British have their first victory. Fort Mackinac was a stunning win against a commander who didn't even know he was at war. Isaac Brock's next target is much better defended, the American stronghold at Fort Detroit.
Do not fear the Yankee Army. The militia is composed mostly of enraged Democrats. Oh, they're more ardent and anxious to engage than the regulars, but they lack discipline. They die very fast.
The American regular army was small. At the outset of war, they increased the number in the regular army, but these were just recruiting guys off the street, very little training, not even fully equipped.
Brock believed the province could actually be held by the proper positioning of troops, by the undertaking of limited offensive action against the Americans at key points, and by securing alliances with the natives.
Taking Fort Detroit will impress the First Nations. It is a crucial military base on the river. It also has weak leadership under the command of General William Hull. an aging 59-year-old veteran of the American Revolution.
I think Hull was a good peacetime general, but didn't have the experience, the training, the gumption, or whatever it was to be a good wartime general.
Hull makes some poor decisions, among them sharing his greatest fears in his letters and shipping them on open water.
My men captured a packet of letters from Hull. The general's letters were interesting. He dramatically overestimated the size of my force. But the private letters from his officers were devastating. They showed me that Hull was weak, afraid to make decisions, and I discovered his greatest fear: Indians.
The revelation adds urgency to Brock's negotiations with the First Nations, including a charismatic Shawnee chief named Tecumseh.
It was late on the evening of August 14th when I first laid eyes on him. In the flickering light of the lanterns, I saw before me a tall man with a singular intensity of gaze.
Tecumseh's dream is to unify the native tribes against American expansion and create their own nation. And he is impressed with Brock. "This is a man," he would later say. Brock is impressed too.
Tecumseh, I think, was extremely good at kind of bridging the gap between First Nations cultures and European cultures.
Brock has only 1,000 men. The Aboriginals bring 500 more. Hull's forces outnumber them by 1,000, and they are well protected inside the fort. Something bold, unusual, is needed.
My officers didn't like the plan, but Tecumseh did.
Brock's plan is a daring bluff. He will try to trick the Americans into overestimating British numbers. It's an audacious plan. But years before, Brock proved he's no stranger to the art of the bluff.
As the story goes, this chap challenged Brock to a duel, and if you're challenged to a duel, you get to choose the weapons and choose the circumstances of the duel.
The challenger was infamous, bully and a braggart, but a very good shot. I accepted the challenge, so I set the terms. I chose pistols. But rather than marking 12 paces before turning to fire, my terms required that my opponent and I exchange fire across the distance of a handkerchief. He had to back down. He had no choice but to resign from the unit.
I think it shows that Brock was very smart. If Brock could bluff the bully, then the bully would back down.
At Fort Detroit, Brock relies on a bluff once again. Knowing he's outnumbered, Brock instructs inexperienced volunteer militiamen to don the red coats of Army regulars. This makes it appear that his troops are better trained. Then Tecumseh joins the game.
Tecumseh's tactics are brilliant. He marches his men single file in plain sight of Fort Detroit, in plain sight for the enemy to see. Then the braves cut back through the woods to pass by a second, and indeed a third time, to deceive the enemy as to our numbers.
The ruse works. Hull believes he is facing a vastly superior force, one filled with the natives he fears. The British fire a single cannonball. Then Brock demands Hull's surrender.
Major General Brock to Brigadier General Hull, Headquarters, Sandwich, August 15th, 1812. Sir, the force at my disposal authorizes me to require of you the immediate surrender of Fort Detroit.
Once Brock realized that Hull didn't have an awful lot of experience with First Nations, realized that he could really play that fear that a lot of North Americans had of First Nations warfare.
It is far from my intention to join in a war of extermination. But you must be aware that the numerous body of Indians who have attached themselves to my troops will be beyond control the moment the contest commences.
The American general panics.
There were reports of political and military opponents of his. He was seen cowering in a corner, had too much to drink, spittle running down his face, drooling, and that's just a man in absolute utmost terror.
Legend has it that Hull was so anxious to surrender, he hung a tablecloth from a window against the wishes of his men.
I think that if the Americans had had someone who could really inspire the troops, he could have obliterated Brock's army.
Bonaparte once said, "I like generals who are lucky." I admit to my share of luck.
Brock's daring tactics have given him an important victory at Detroit, but Britain still hopes to avoid further conflict. They agree to stop seizing sailors from American ships, and Prevost calls for a truce.
Brock was concerned that if war did break out again, then the ceasefire simply gave them time to build up their forces on the Niagara frontier.
General Prevost's mistake could cost us dearly. My only option is to prepare for invasion.
This is Fort George in Niagara, Isaac Brock's command center. In the fall of 1812, Brock is enduring a ceasefire his superiors hope will end the war. Brock has 2 victories already, but now he has to wait while his adversaries gather their army. All he can do is try to guess where the Americans will strike.
Everybody knew the Americans were going to come. The question was when and where.
Brock suspects the Americans will attack one of 4 key British positions: Fort Erie in the south, Chippewa, Queenston, a transportation hub on the portage route around Niagara Falls, or Fort George in the north.
Brock had to try and determine as early as possible where the main target would be and get the most troops to that spot as quickly as possible. It was a difficult position. The cards were in the American court.
Brock decides to station the majority of his troops at the British stronghold of Fort George. But Brock is wrong. On October 13th, he awakens to hear guns in the distance.
So when the sound of the artillery reached Fort George, Brock leaps out of his bed and immediately heads south.
The Americans have crossed the Niagara River and are attacking Queenston. Brock is more than 12 kilometers from the battle.
Queenston was important because it was along the portage line that went around Niagara Falls. So if you were coming from Lake Ontario, you would come up the Niagara River, offload everything at Queenston, march south towards Chippewa, bypassing the falls, and reload everything on boats and carry on south to Lake Erie. So if the Americans have occupied that point, he'd be able to disrupt British communications, and if they could stay there through the winter, then hopefully undertake further operations.
Near the crest of Queenston Heights, I saw one of our battery. Our cannon were laying fire on the enemy boats.
Just as Brock arrives, the Redan battery has been captured by the Americans. It's a crucial British cannon position on the heights above the beach.
He sees the fighting going on the beachhead expanding and the threat of the British being withdrawn from the beachhead. He or somebody orders the company that was protecting the artillery on the heights down in the village to deal with this battle on the beachhead. And just as that company comes down, the Americans on the heights launch their attack.
Brock wants a higher view of the battle. He climbs the hill, but a small group of Americans have followed a fishing path and gained the high ground behind the British at the Redan Battery, where an 18-pound cannon can lay waste to the town of Queenston.
We have the bravery, but we have not the men to staunch a flow of enemy soldiers.
At first, Brock and his men retreat. Then Brock makes a fateful decision.
Brock was astute enough a military commander to know that that Redan battery position was key to the battle.
Brock takes immediate action. He assembles what soldiers he can and leads a charge to recapture the Redan battery.
Problem is, he's going uphill, and he has to leap over several fences. He's leading troops that have been fighting for several hours.
When he was right at the base of the heights, an American infantryman stepped forward and fired a musket at him. Hit him in the heart, and that was it.
This is the problem, because you have the commander-in-chief of the province, the man who's responsible for that entire province, basically taking on the job of a company commander. And he's killed as a result of that.
British reinforcements arrive. The Americans are driven back. The British win the battle, just 17 men dead. One of them is Isaac Brock, perhaps a victim of his own bold nature. But in 1812, Brock's sacrifice makes him a hero.
The militia adored Brock and quickly branded him the hero of Upper Canada. He seems to have been highly respected and regarded by First Nations allies as well. So I think Brock's real ability and real contribution was in his ability to pull these disparate elements together.
Brock's actions echoed across Upper Canada.
The lesson from 1812 was that Upper Canada could be defended.
The Americans are smarting from 3 big losses. But in the coming year, their armies will cross the Niagara again. Thanks to Brock, Upper Canada is ready to stand its ground.
They call me the savior of Upper Canada. Yet it is they who ultimately must save themselves. If I have done anything, it is to show them that they can make a difference in this conflict. The outcome is not preordained.
He was a soldier since he was 14 years old, a French-Canadian in the British Army, and a disciplinarian so fierce his brother-in-law transferred to a different regiment. Now, Charles de Salaberry must take a few British regulars, some untrained militia, and First Nations allies, and stop an overwhelming 4,000 American troops from taking Lower Canada. If he fails, Canada is lost. If he succeeds, he becomes a legend.
When you have a small force, you must make a lot of noise. The Americans are ready. Based on my experience in Europe, they'll approach along the Chateauguay River. They'll have barely 3 weeks to prepare.
It's the fall of 1813. The war against the United States is going badly for Britain. Upper Canada's capital at York has been attacked. The British have lost control of Lake Erie and have been driven from the Detroit frontier. And the United States are about to launch their largest offensive of the war.
Their goal, if everything went perfectly, would be to eject the British from North America.
Everything rests upon our defense of Montreal. If the Americans defeat us there, our supply lines will be cut. Upper and Lower Canada will be lost.
The American plan is to attack Montreal and Lower Canada, now Quebec, in 2 waves. First, 7,000 men will travel northeast on the St. Lawrence from Lake Ontario. Then, 4,000 men will drive north from Plattsburgh, New York along the Chateauguay River. If they succeed, Upper and Lower Canada will be cut off from each other.
My men and I have fought raids in this area. I know exactly where we should take position.
Governor General Sir George Prevost is in charge of British forces in North America. He's been preparing for a possible attack for several years, despite the stunning lack of trained soldiers.
We are desperate for men, but Prevost knows he'll get no help from Britain, not while Napoleon threatens the Empire.
With the British Army committed to the war in Europe, Prevost has been recruiting volunteer militia across Upper and Lower Canada. In some areas, convincing men to sign up is difficult. But in Lower Canada, he has the perfect man for the job. A French-Canadian who is also a senior officer in the British Army, Charles Michel de Salaberry.
At the risk of seeming arrogant, I am the obvious choice for this assignment. Being Canadian myself, I can more easily convince others to join the fight.
The British absolutely needed French Canadians to fight the Americans in the War of 1812. First of all, French Canadians were the majority at the time in Canada, so they were needed for supplies, to gather intelligence, and of course, to fight.
De Salaberry has another advantage over other officers.
He had worked closely with a German officer who was in British service, Major General Sir Francis de Rottenberg, who was a leading proponent of light infantry, which was a different mode of fighting.
In 1813, most battles were fought with the troops lined up shoulder to shoulder in close ranks. Muskets were inaccurate, so tightly packed soldiers fired in unified volleys.
The idea was if we mass everybody together and volley our fire towards them, we'll hit something. Light infantry was the opposite of that, and that was designed as a tool to harass the enemy, to fight through close terrain because these large formations couldn't move through the wood line.
So it isn't someone who waits in line, who waits to hear orders. He must go ahead, take the initiative, be capable of hiding, of keeping watch, and attacking very quickly.
My light infantry tactics are perfectly suited to this place. When it comes to moving through the bush, harassing the enemy, there's nothing better.
The previous year, Prevost and de Salaberry recruited men for a light infantry unit that could use these tactics in Lower Canada.
We will need officers who will be able to endure the mental and physical distresses associated with this type of war. Light infantry must often bivouac, sleep outside, march for long days and even long weeks, march and chase the enemy, trying to find them, following their tracks. De Salaberry had been a light infantry officer since he was 16 years old.
This light infantry was called the Voltigeurs Canadiens. They must be effective to play a key role in Canada's defense. But first, de Salaberry must make farmers into soldiers.
I need time, muskets, uniforms, drill. All of this takes time, and time is in short supply. The Americans are coming. I have every kind of troublemaker, wastrels, drunks, deserters, but I will have my way.
In the 1800s, militias had a bad reputation. They weren't issued uniforms, they got little training, and they lacked discipline. De Salaberry wants his Voltigeurs to be different.
Being disciplined under fire is extremely important. On the other hand, they must be able to hide. To fire salvos, yes, but to do it in small groups.
De Salaberry drives his men hard. His discipline becomes legendary. His own brother-in-law, a captain, transfers to another regiment because he finds De Salaberry too demanding.
His drive for professionalism was too much for some people.
My men are willing, but they are unused to following orders. I'm not certain which group is more difficult. The Irish, the Scots, the Germans, or my own Canadians.
The men composed a song that described De Salaberry. And what the men were singing about their commander was not very flattering. The song says that there's nothing harder than being under the command of De Salaberry, and that this devil was going to kill them.
De Salaberry is also famous for his temper. His nickname is Gunpowder.
It's true, I have a temper. Once, some fool in my regiment boasted that he'd killed a Canadian, like me, in a duel. I stood up and said, "Well, now is your chance to fight another." The fight was not easy. He managed to cut me. I cut him back. Some say I nearly cut him in half. This is an exaggeration. But in the end, I did prevail.
It is the fall of 1813. De Salaberry commands 300 voltigeurs. They are now tough, well-trained, experts at moving through the Canadian bush. More men will join the fight. The local militia provides some, the British Army a handful more. More than 100 Mohawk warriors from the Kahnawake Nation have been recruited too. But the Americans outnumber his troops by far, and they are on the move.
September 25th, 1813. My dear father, the province is in great danger. Scouts have spotted the Americans gathering at the border, 40 miles from where I write these lines.
Two armies were now converging on Montreal. Everybody's worst dream was happening.
Within just a few days, De Salaberry's scouts spot Hampton's troops at the town of Four Corners in New York State.
I have traveled through this area. I know where I want the Americans to go.
De Salaberry sets up a series of defenses designed to funnel the enemy to a specific location. One side is protected by the waters of the Chateauguay River. The other borders a swampy forest that's difficult for troops to cross.
He realized that with the Americans advancing that way, if he used that terrain, which had a gentle slope immediately in front of the position that he occupied, it would be what we call in the military a killing zone.
Here, this is the ideal spot to watch the enemies advance with maximum protection. We can dig trenches and cut down trees to make abattis. Then, all we need to do is wait.
He brought in over 100 French-Canadian loggers who cut down trees to create a line of fire and give them a clear view of the advancing enemy. The trees were piled together to make many abattis to prevent the Americans from getting through. And so the American troops wouldn't be able to see the defenders behind the trees.
I shall also use our language to our advantage. I ordered my men to speak French. Hence, if we are overheard in the heat of the battle, the enemy will not be able to understand us.
On October 25th, the Americans arrive. De Salaberry is ready. The American general, Wade Hampton, knows his enemy is out there, but has no sense of its size. He sends 1,000 men across the river with orders to try to circle around and attack De Salaberry from the rear. The battle will be fought on both sides of the river.
I know I can win if I use the terrain to my advantage. I know every turn in the river. The Americans only have maps, and not very good ones.
The Americans' progress was very difficult. Men who were sent out on reconnaissance came back and told their commander it was impossible. It was too dark. They would get lost. It wasn't worth it.
De Salaberry's forces opened fire on the Americans, then vanished back into the woods, luring the enemy toward the abattis. The terrain at the battleground forces the Americans to attack in a narrow column. The men at the back can't reach the fighting at the front, and many of the troops are confused. But they still outnumber the Canadians, and the battle has just begun. October 26, 1813. An American invasion force 4,000 strong is marching up the Chateauguay River to Montreal. Charles de Salaberry is determined to stop them.
So far, the abattis are working just as I had hoped, but I have another idea.
De Salaberry knows he is outnumbered, so he uses a series of bluffs.
I'll order my buglers to sound an advance on both sides of the river. I want the enemy to think I have a massive army hidden in the bush.
Bluff is great in war because war is a physical act between two forces, but it's a psychological act as well. It's like a boxing match, a hockey match, any sporting competition, except the stakes are a bit higher.
De Salaberry's strategy works. Thinking a large attack is imminent, the Americans hesitate. According to legend, this becomes a defining moment for de Salaberry.
From my position, I can see both sides of the river. I watch as a column of Americans advance right into our sights. They send a single rider up to demand surrender.
An American cavalryman approached before the Americans fired a shot and said to the Canadians, "Gentlemen, we mean you no harm."
He appeals to the Canadians, speaking their language, saying, maybe you want to just give up, we're here to liberate you. And de Salaberry takes a soldier's musket and shoots him. So that's his reply. So the battle's on.
He was the enemy. I saw no reason to hesitate, so I fired.
The fact that de Salaberry shot first showed that he and the British truly had a fierce and aggressive mentality.
With battle underway, de Salaberry's plan unfolds.
Legend has it that he was standing on the tall stump of a felled tree, surveying what was happening in front of him and on the opposite bank with his spyglass, and aiming heavy fire on the advancing troops. They are about 200 men on the main abattis, firing on a column of more than 1,000 men.
Our light infantry tactics proved to be even more effective than I had dared to hope. We're protected by the abattis, and the American musket fire is passing right over our heads. Our native allies are also most effective.
Despite their small numbers, the Indians' war cries sound terrible to the Americans.
Natives did not fight in line. It was completely anathema to their methodology of warfare. De Salaberry would see a similarity in the way they fight, and that would help them work together because they're basically speaking the same language tactically. The main attack, which is coming against de Salaberry's position in very short order, it takes casualties and it can't advance. There is no room to maneuver to get around the position.
The fighting lasts just 4 hours. The American general Wade Hampton withdraws his troops from the battle. He decides to return to the United States. Thanks to de Salaberry's training and cunning, half the threat facing Montreal is now gone.
October 26 has been a glorious day. The battle only lasted 4 hours, but already General Hampton and the American army have been driven back by my little band of soldiers, all of them Canadian.
The Battle of Chateauguay is particular in that it is really a victory for the colonials, the French Canadians, not the regulars. This victory should be entirely attributed to Charles Michel de Salaberry and his militia.
The victory is crucial, but the invasion isn't over yet. There are still 7,000 Americans sailing down the St. Lawrence towards Montreal. But Chateauguay has paved the way to victory.
Montreal is saved from the south. This is a significant boost to the morale of the civilian personnel, but also to the military leaders, because they know that threat's eliminated.
The 2nd American Army meets the British just 95 miles from Montreal at Chrysler's Farm. This time, Lower Canada's voltigeurs combine with the light infantry militia from Upper Canada, British regulars, and Mohawk warriors. The Americans outnumber the British 2-1, but the Americans are poorly trained. Their musket volleys are uncoordinated and have little effect. The Americans are also very low on supplies and starving. The battle is short. The Americans withdraw quickly and move into winter quarters in New York State.
Excellent news. Both invasion forces have been defeated. And I do not think I'm boasting when I say that my victory helped make it possible.
In the aftermath of the battle, de Salaberry waits for glory. He knows future promotions depend on it. He is soon disappointed.
After the Battle of Chateauguay, Charles Michel was infuriated when he learned that General Prévost did not give an accurate report, in that he took credit for the action without even mentioning Charles Michel de Salaberry's name.
The greater part of the merit is being taken away from me. I'm the one who set up the defenses. I alone took the initiative. None of the superior officers arrived until after the action was over.
In an attempt to right the wrong, one of de Salaberry's men writes an eyewitness account to the Quebec Mercury. In fact, it's likely that Prévost did intend to give de Salaberry credit for the victory. He even issues a second report elaborating de Salaberry's role. But for de Salaberry, it's too little too late.
Chambly, November 12th, 1813. Dear O'Sullivan, you have rendered me that justice which is still denied me at headquarters, and which I no longer expect.
He finally rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel in 1814, after chasing it for almost 10 years. But it was very hard won, and he was bitter about that too. He was unhappy that the British Crown did not recognize Charles Michel de Salaberry's full worth.
In 1815, Lieutenant Colonel Charles de Salaberry resigns his commission.
I'm hurt, and I've had enough with war. I was never given the credit I deserved. I've decided to leave the army, get married, and start a business in Quebec City.
But the recognition de Salaberry craves does come in his lifetime. De Salaberry eventually receives one of the British Army's highest awards, the Gold Medal, in recognition of his role at the Battle of the Chateauguay. He's also made a Companion of the Order of Bath. Perhaps the greatest honor comes from the troops he pushed so hard.
My voltigeurs never doubted my role. They gave me a beautiful silver platter to commemorate our victory.
What makes us unique is that the tactical commander is the Canadian leader who made an influence on the war, unlike any other.
The ultimate honor is victory. And this war will have brought us the ultimate reward, Canada.
1813. The Americans occupy part of Niagara. They sit inside a local home plotting more raids against the British. Laura Secord overhears their conversation. Someone has to warn the British. But her husband, a British officer, is wounded. Her children are young, and there is only one person who can do the job.
I'll have to be careful. Enemy patrols are everywhere. But I must warn the British about the American attack.
What happens next turns a housewife into a legend. Spring 1813. The United States and Britain have been at war for nearly a year. The Americans want Britain out of North America. Britain defends its territory, but has few troops to spare for the conflict. In Upper Canada, the two nations battle to control the all-important Niagara Peninsula, heart of the supply lines for the Great Lakes region. The Americans control a 12-kilometer strip along the Canadian side of the Niagara River. For the civilians, life is filled with uncertainty and danger.
I used to have no quarrel with the Americans. I'm from Massachusetts. But Upper Canada is my home, and these soldiers are invaders.
But if an army crossed the river to take offensive operations, you could very soon have American troops in your village, in your house. They could be threatening you. They could be taking your possessions. They could be killing members of your family.
When soldiers would occupy a village, the first thing they do is smash out all the windows. So you'd smash the windows out so you could shoot from whoever's house you've occupied. The furniture becomes material to build obstacles with, slow the enemy down, and it becomes the firewood that you're going to cook your lunch with.
Laura Secord lives in the village of Queenston, a strategic waypoint for goods traveling on the Niagara River. By the spring of 1813, many residents here have witnessed the war firsthand.
When James marched off with the militia, I had few worries. Just a day of training a year for the King's birthday and all's well. So I thought. And then the Americans invaded.
Experiencing what she had along the Niagara frontier would have influenced Laura Secord to a great degree. She would have seen the effects of the battle. She would have seen the destruction.
They fought the Battle of Queenston Heights right beside my town. My husband James was there fighting, and he didn't come back. After the gun stopped, I went to the battlefield to find him.
During the course of battle, women would be away from the battlefield, but as it was ending or ended, they would be on the field looking for their spouses. Sometimes their spouse was okay, other times they weren't.
The story's always gone that she went up on the heights to find James above the village, and that's where she finds him, and with the help of others, gets him back down to the village. He's shot through the leg and through the shoulder, so he's been hit twice by musket fire. Not a joke by even modern firearm standards. These are huge projectiles, 3/4 of an inch across, flying through the air. So he's in pretty rough shape.
The British won the Battle of Queenston Heights, but the Secords paid dearly for it. James is still wounded, recovering at home when the Americans attack again. May of 1813. 6,000 American troops bombard Fort George. The British fort is defended by just over 1,200 men. The Americans take Fort George, their first major victory of the war. The following month, the battle rages on. Land is won and lost. The war takes on a deadly ebb and flow. Legend tells us that during one of the U.S. occupations of Queenston, 3 American officers are billeted in the Secord home. Lying in his bed, the disabled James Secord poses no threat. And Laura, after all, is just a woman.
Americans pay no attention to me, as long as I keep them fed.
Women in society during the period of the War of 1812 had a limited role in society. Even those women who were in the upper strata of society may have been educated, involved in various activities, but they had very limited political authority, pull, if you will. They had access to wealth, but they couldn't control it. So in the midst of this war, women find themselves in the path of this, and they're affected in different ways. You have the civilian women living in the areas where the campaigns occur that experience different things. Some of them are killed in the course of the various raids that occur.
The Americans occupying this area face a serious logistical problem. They hold Fort George, but little else, thanks in part to the efforts of Lieutenant James Fitzgibbon.
James Fitzgibbon was conducting raids against the Americans and harassing them.
These are the ruins of DeQ House. Fitzgibbon sets up a makeshift headquarters here. With the help of more than 100 Aboriginal allies, he attacks the Americans again and again. The Americans have had enough.
So the goal is you take out Fitzgibbon's headquarters. This would disrupt the operations of not only Fitzgibbon and his handful of volunteers, but the greater threat would have been these large numbers of native warriors that could roam around and ambush American reconnaissance patrols or foraging parties who are looking for supplies or foods.
If the Americans can remove Fitzgibbon and his natives, there would be very little to stop them from capturing the entire Niagara region. It could turn the tide of the war. They begin to plan a strategy. According to legend, Laura Secord is there.
They were bragging about some plan they had to attack the British outpost at Beaver Dam. And Laura Secord overheard this.
They were full of stories of themselves and their victories, and they were bragging of their plan to attack our forces at Beaver Dams. I paid close attention and learned all I could.
Laura Secord realizes she has military intelligence that could save lives.
I think Laura Secord had every reason in the world to do nothing. She had a wounded husband to look after. She had 5 kids to look after.
Laura knows she must act quickly, or her warning will come too late. June 22nd, 1813. Laura Secord is convinced that an American attack on British forces in Niagara is imminent.
James is in no condition to help. Should I go to Beaver Dams myself and warn them of their danger?
I think for the most part, Laura Secord would have been terrified. Not for her own safety, but she would have been terrified for the safety of her family and her friends.
James looked at me and whispered, "Laura, our British soldiers must be warned." But with James so weak, there's no one to take the message but me. It'll be all right. If only I avoid the American patrols, get back before I'm missed. But I'll have to go soon, or I'll be too late to save them.
I think Laura Secord was pretty brave. Not many women during her time period or this time period would have gone out and taken a message like that, knowing the impending danger that there was.
I know this region well enough, but the Americans will surely be patrolling. At some point, I will have to lead the road and travel through the bush.
She was looking for Lieutenant Fitzgibbon, which she knew was further inland, a trek of about 20 miles that she would have to undertake.
The hardest part is saying goodbye to the children. I can't tell them everything, only that I have to go, and I'll be back soon.
Laura Secord, at some point, has to tell her eldest daughter that she's going to go on this trip. It's an account that comes later from a granddaughter that said she spoke to her children, or at least her eldest, to explain that she was leaving. I think that's a pretty powerful moment.
I don't see any Americans, but I don't want to be seen. Perhaps if I leave at dawn. I've heard that there are British forces stationed somewhere near Beaver Dam. I'll have to cross 12 Mile Creek somehow. It might take me all day to get there.
She knew she couldn't go on the main roads because she would be stopped. There were American patrols out, troops all over the place.
The train would have been very tough going. You're hiking up the escarpment several times by the way that she would have gone. You're going through streams, across little creeks. She's hopping over fallen trees by her accounts. So it would have been rough for her.
Now that the sun is high, it's very hot. And then there's the insects.
Her outfit would not have been suitable at all to go on this long walk. It's the hottest day of the year, so you're wearing a lot of layers to go hiking. Floor-length dress is going to get caught on everything, and basically what we know now is ballet flats. So flat shoes, no support, easily come off. So it's very difficult to go hiking in them for sure.
As I walk, I rehearse in my mind what I will have to say. My name is Laura Ingersoll Secord. I need to speak to your commanding officer. You're all in danger from an American attack.
This is pretty rough terrain, and she is not stopping to ask anybody for help. Because again, there's a sense that she's not sure who she can trust out of the population. So not only are there human obstacles out there, not just Americans, but also Canadians who may not be that loyal to the Crown.
Laura also has another concern: First Nations warriors.
The natives frighten me. I most support the British here in Upper Canada, but I've heard that some are fighting for the American side.
She's a little worried about who she's going to run into, has a fear of these native warriors.
Laura's journey is long. There is no straight path. She is thought to have walked first to the nearby town of St. David's, then west and slightly north to what is now St. Catharines, before leaving the road to reach her destination through the bush.
I was thankful to discover a fallen tree that would help me cross 12 Mile Creek. I was so thirsty from the heat. I had to keep my spirits up by reminding myself the importance of each and every step. After walking for 17 hours, I finally met a group of natives. My heart was pounding, but I had to take a chance that they were friendly.
In a letter that she had written, she said that she ran into these natives. She was scared. She didn't know who they were allied with, so she tried to get her point across that she needed to get to Fitzgibbon.
I kept repeating, I need to speak to your commanding officer. I have vital information about an attack. Woman. That's all he said.
It would have been hard to make herself understood. But the fact that she had desperation in her voice and the appearance she would have had after hiking for like 14, 15 hours definitely would have showed that there was some sort of importance to the message. So if she was able to get out Fitzgibbon and they recognized the name, it would help.
It's dark. The natives lead Laura to Deque House.
I told Fitzgibbon what I know. I said I overheard the Americans planning an attack. I feared for your lives, and so I came to warn you. Now all I can think of is getting home.
With her message delivered, Laura Secord returns home. Fitzgibbon and his native allies prepare an ambush, but there's no sign of an American attack. It begins to look like Laura Secord may have been the victim of a hoax. June 22nd, 1813. Laura Secord has traveled to Deque House to warn British forces under James Fitzgibbon that an American attack is imminent. Fitzgibbon's native allies prepare an ambush, but the Americans do not appear.
So they began to doubt her story. Maybe she had heard from an unreliable source. Being a woman too, they would definitely question where the information was coming from.
They thought I was mistaken or foolish. I don't know. But I know what I heard.
It is at this moment, with many around him doubting Laura Secord's story, that James Fitzgibbon proves his mettle as a leader.
As a professional British soldier who'd been in the ranks, he'd been a sergeant before he'd become an officer. This woman comes into your headquarters and tells you this account. You could have easily discounted that and ignored that. So back to credit, some credit goes to Fitzgibbon for acknowledging that, that not only was the information helpful, but it was good information that you could act upon.
June 23rd, Fitzgibbon gets word that more than 600 Americans are on the move from Fort George. They have artillery, mounted dragoons, some say gunpowder to blow up the house. Fitzgibbon has only 46 British soldiers. This battle will be fought almost entirely by his native allies. The Aboriginal warriors move swiftly. They set up an ambush.
The Americans marched straight into the trap, thanks to me.
It's a running fight. Obviously, the native warriors are employing more ambush-style tactics, taking turns, taking pot shots at the Americans, and really slowing the Americans down, wearing them down till the Americans end up in a clear area, in an area that's often described as the beach woods. And this is where they make their stand.
No one knows for certain exactly how the battle unfolded. The Americans have an overwhelming force. Yet, after only 3 hours of battle, they surrender.
It's true that British reinforcements were on their way, but I think that it was the fierce reputation of the natives that convinced the Americans to give in.
You're an American soldier, you shot off a lot of your ammunition, you're hot, you're exhausted, and now the best infantry in the world are going to show up, along with these fierce native warriors taking pot shots at you. So this is a pretty scary situation to be in, and that's why Colonel Borsler decides to surrender.
The victory keeps the Americans penned into a small area of Niagara. Shortly after, they abandon Fort George and retreat to the United States.
Laura didn't get any credit immediately after the fact. She actually kept quiet about what she had done.
Years later, she becomes determined to get her due.
I did as much as any veteran that day. And I wrote to Fitzgibbon to ask him to support me, to tell them what I did.
He says 3 times over the next 3 decades in writing that the information she gave was helpful in the victory at the Battle of Beaver Dams, which was a complete defeat for the U.S. forces. Only a handful of men get away, who happen to be on horseback and ride off before they get captured with the other almost 500 American troops.
People question the story about Laura a lot, but the fact that Fitzgibbon was willing to write these letters in the first place shows that he believed it was important.
So a fairly fair-minded guy later in life who could have taken all the credit for what happened at Beaver Dams, but he chose to let people know that other folks were responsible.
Fitzgibbon was very kind, but still I got nothing.
Lots of veteran stories were getting out there. The Prince of Wales was getting a scroll with all the veterans' names on it, so she wanted her story known.
Then I heard that the Prince Regent was coming to Queenston to dedicate Brock's monument. I decided I should go and sign my name next to all the men.
The prince got the scroll, asked about her story being the only female on the list, and was so impressed he sent her £100 for duty to the king.
Thanks to the money from the prince, I lived out my remaining years in Chippewa quite happily. My daughter cared for me until the end.
She physically underwent this long, arduous journey through very difficult conditions to get this information out. That resolve is something that we can respect.
I know what people said about me when I signed that scroll, that I'm just a woman, that I'm a braggart, but I'm proud of what I did to save this country and my home.
Hated by American leaders, coveted by British generals, revered by the First Nations.
Perhaps the greatest Indian to ever live.
Tecumseh is a crucial linchpin in the War of 1812. The British know they cannot win this war without a First Nations alliance, and that means making a promise to this charismatic leader.
We have come together, many native nations, united in one cause, a homeland for our people. For this, we will fight with the British to make war on the Americans. Our lives are in the hands of the Great Spirit.
But will the cause live longer than the legend? Britain and the United States are on the verge of war. At stake, control of a continent. The Americans outnumber the British. If Canada is to survive, the British must ally with North American natives. Few will have more influence over this union than the charismatic Shawnee known as Tecumseh.
Every day, the Americans drive us farther and farther west. I see no way to remain at peace. I will travel the land and speak to all our peoples and let them know we need to fight together.
Tecumseh has a dream. He wants to thwart American westward expansion and establish a permanent Indian homeland in what's known as the Old Northwest, stretching west from the Ohio River to the Mississippi and north to the Great Lakes.
Tecumseh's vision was a lofty one. And perhaps that's why his legacy is what it is. He dreamed the impossible dream.
We want to save this land. And if the Americans try to take it, we will fight and die if we must.
Prior to the War of 1812, the native peoples of the area south of the Great Lakes had been conducting a losing battle against American encroachment since the American Revolutionary War.
They take our land, our animals, always pushing us out of our homes. We cannot rest.
Tecumseh realized that without serious action, if the trend continued, the natives would lose all their lands and have no home.
In the years leading up to the War of 1812, Tecumseh travels throughout Mississippi and Ohio, recruiting support for a united Native Confederacy.
Tecumseh's idea of bringing all the Native nations together was really risky, very radical.
Shawnee, Potawatomi, Choctaw, Kikpu, Chickasaw. So many tongues, so many nations. We have only one enemy. These lands are ours. No one has the right to remove us. The Master of Life has appointed us these lands to light our home fires, and here we shall remain.
Using translators when needed, Tecumseh promises potential allies that if they join his confederacy and fight, they'll be repaid with a permanent homeland. Not everyone is convinced.
Native nations are dubious and cautious for, well, more than one reason, because if you think about the obvious, fighting in battles also means that you're taken away from your homelands, and you're taken away from your crops, and you're taken away from your natural economy of hunting.
We have much to teach the British about the land and the game. When we come to a river, we know where the waters will let us cross. They need our wisdom, and we need them.
Tecumseh realized that if he was going to successfully resist American encroachment and fight them in a military sense, he could not do it alone. He needed white technology, white organization, and also white numbers to assist him in an alliance.
But supporting the British is a gamble.
He was very suspicious of the British government in light of past abandonments of the native cause.
Obviously, it was the British colonies who wanted his people's land to begin with, and there was treaties that were negotiated that displaced, the Indians further westward. But now he wanted them as allies.
June 18th, 1812, the Americans declare war. On July 17th, British forces capture Fort Mackinac, a remote American outpost on Lake Huron. The victory is swift, decisive. Not a single man is lost. This bold victory impresses Native leaders.
The easy victory by the British really helped the doubters among the Native nations to say, yes, we need to fight with Tecumseh and the British.
Meanwhile, Tecumseh and his warriors are winning impressive victories too. August 4th, Brownstown, south of Detroit. Tecumseh and 24 other warriors await an American force 6 times as large. Tecumseh's men attack. They are swift, efficient.
It was a kind of fighting that Europeans and Americans trained in the European tradition had never really kind of witnessed before. We would call it today guerrilla-type war fighting, using the trees, using the foliage as camouflage.
It is a magnificent victory. 19 Americans are killed, 12 are wounded. Tecumseh loses a single warrior. The commander of Upper Canada, General Isaac Brock, hears of the Native victory and of Tecumseh.
On the outbreak of war, Brock was one very desperate man, desperate for manpower. Given the Napoleonic conflict, it was clear that many British troops could not be spared for British North America. That meant that he was left with some 1,500 troops with which to defend a very long frontier.
This is the site of Fort Amherstburg, across the river from Detroit. Brock is here with British troops planning the next stages of the war. He agrees to meet with Native leaders.
Each Native nation can provide so many warriors, perhaps over 1,000. And you to look at all the different Native nations in that manner, 1,000 here, 1,000 here, another 1,000, and that's a lot. And certainly you don't want them fighting against you. So why not have them fighting for you?
At the house of a British official, Brock comes face to face with the Shawnee leader, Tecumseh.
The two coming together, it's like they've met their lost brother. In each of them, they find the equal of another warrior. And warrior meaning at the highest level, and the highest level meaning that you're willing to risk your life. You're willing to die for your cause.
This Brock is a man. We shall fight alongside this one. Our time is now.
To help secure the alliance, Brock makes an extraordinary promise.
Brock actually made a promise to Tecumseh that in return for Native participation in the war, he would recover lands lost to the Americans through encroachment.
The British have turned their backs on us before. The Great Spirit shows us this is a different war. We shall fight alongside the Redcoats for our homeland.
August 1812, British commander Isaac Brock is in a difficult position. The overall British strategy encourages caution. They know that Americans are severely divided about this war and hope that will buy them the time they need to negotiate peace. But the natives want action, and so does Brock. He invites Tecumseh to help him attack the American fort at Detroit.
Tecumseh had to have an inducement to engage in this war because the risks were dire. If he lost, they lost everything. If they won, as he put it, this is our best chance to establish the homeland.
Tecumseh agrees. Together they plan to attack Fort Detroit the very next day.
Well, how are you going to do this? Fort Detroit is a village with a palisade around it and with a fort, and it's on the river too, so how do you do that? Brock, he asked Tecumseh as much as he knew about Detroit, about the palisade, about the fort, and even about the natural environment. It was said that even at one point that Tecumseh very carefully, and you can imagine this, taking the piece of a bark and drawing a map of Detroit.
Brock and Tecumseh use a powerful bluff against the American commander, William Hull. They know Hull has overestimated Brock's troops and is terrified of the natives.
Tecumseh magnified his numbers as well by running in and out of the bush repeatedly with his followers. This had two effects. First of all, it magnified his numbers, but secondly, it made Hull more conscious of the fact that there were large numbers of Native warriors out there just waiting to get at the defenders.
The British fire a single cannon shot. It plows into the officers' quarters.
Brock sends Hull a message, and he says something to the effect that you have to surrender. I cannot control the Indians if we attack, because the Indians, as you know by their reputation, will pillage and mutilate all of the people, including the women and children.
The natives conducted these, what we would consider barbaric practices of war deliberately as a technique to psychologically undermine the morale of the enemy.
Hull is terrified. The bluff works. Against the wishes of his officers, Hull surrenders. It is a stunning victory.
When General Hull arrived at Detroit on the outbreak of war, he outnumbered the British defenders in the locality by 10-1. Upper Canada itself was considered lost by most of the residents and observers at the time. By capturing Detroit, Brock had completely reversed Washington's expectations for a swift and easy victory in Upper Canada.
We have won a great victory for our people and for our friend, the King.
But Brock and Tecumseh have little time to savor the victory. On the 13th of October, the Americans cross the Niagara River and launch an invasion of Queenston Heights. The Americans have the advantage of surprise, but Brock's forces, Native and British reinforcements, drive the Americans back across the river. Brock's forces, along with a contingent of Iroquois warriors, undertake a brilliant counterattack and encircle the American forces at Queenston Heights. The British win the battle, but lose a leader. As General Isaac Brock is leading a charge to retake a crucial gun position, a musket ball hits him in the chest, killing Tecumseh's kindred spirit.
Tecumseh felt like he had actually lost a brother. Brothers in war, brothers for a common cause, brothers in respect for each other, and that type of admiration and commitment to each other, doing the same thing and wanting to, even if they had to give their lives. When Isaac Brock being killed in action, Tecumseh now was alone again.
Brock was not like any other white man. He was brave, and his word was good.
With Brock gone, Tecumseh must work with Major General Henry Proctor. Tecumseh soon discovers Proctor is a very different kind of ally.
What Tecumseh thought of Henry Proctor was a commander who was perhaps playing it really safe.
This new redcoat leader is not like Brock, our brother. This one does not seek to win war, only to avoid losing it. We do not know if we can trust him.
The loss of Isaac Brock could not have come at a worse time for Tecumseh.
After the capture of Detroit, Governor Harrison conducted search and destroy raids in Indiana, destroying native villages and particularly their accumulated provisions. By destroying the provisions, you destroy their ability to fight.
We cannot let the Americans take our lands. Will the British fight alongside us or not?
Proctor decides to invade Ohio. Tecumseh is eager to help. They attack Tecumseh's old enemy, William Henry Harrison, at Fort Meigs. April 28, 1813. Fort Meigs is heavily fortified. Tecumseh arrives with 2,800 men, a combination of militia, British regulars, and native warriors. For 2 days, both sides prepare. On May 1st, the siege begins. For 3 days, British forces bombard the fort while natives wait to ambush any arriving American reinforcements. There's no way to breach the defenses, and the Americans refuse to come out to fight.
It stood on commanding ground with a cleared killing zone all around. It was professionally designed by West Point engineers. Fort Meigs was a tough nut, and the British and their native allies simply didn't have the wherewithal to reduce it.
It's hard to fight people who live like groundhogs.
May 5th, American reinforcements arrive at the fort. Tecumseh's warriors attack.
There are many stories about the role of Tecumseh where he actually intervened in a massacre that was in fact in progress.
The savage type of reputation that many warriors gained was from the practice of plundering, rape, mutilation of dead bodies, things like that. That really made Tecumseh sick. It was not at the level that he thought of a warrior.
Tecumseh orders his men to stop.
I've seen war for many seasons now. I've seen blood run like water into the ground. I say this, a true warrior has no need to do such things.
May 9th, Fort Meigs is still not taken after 8 days of attack. Proctor orders his army to retreat.
Tecumseh, of course, viewed the proposal for a British retreat as an act of treachery.
Some of Tecumseh's warriors didn't want to go into Canada because they thought that that was the line that their homelands were really kind of south of that area. And so you see that kind of, debate, that kind of conversation, around the campfires.
We must fight here in this place. This is our time.
It was as if that he was going to die on the battlefield, and he knew that.
In the fall of 1813, Tecumseh and the British have retreated to the Detroit River, hounded by Tecumseh's archenemy, William Henry Harrison. Harrison's goal is to recapture Fort Detroit, the site of Tecumseh's great victory with Isaac Brock. The Americans are on the offensive. On September 10, 1813, American ships defeat British naval forces at the Battle of Lake Erie. It's a devastating loss. The British have lost control of the waterway. Settlements on the Detroit River frontier cannot be resupplied.
After the Battle of Lake Erie, from a military point of view, the Allied position on the Detroit frontier was essentially hopeless. The British leader, Proctor, proposed a retreat. Tecumseh did not support this because he saw this as the end of his dream for a native homeland.
Tecumseh protests, but Proctor begins to retreat up the Thames River on September 27th.
Now we see you drawing back like a fat animal, running off with its tail between its legs.
This was a complicated retreat over mud-soaked roads. Many of the men were sick. Over 100 of them had to be moved in wagons, etc. The weather was not favorable. The Americans were on horseback and they were able to overtake the trailing elements of the retreat.
October 5th, 1813. British forces decide their best chance is to turn and fight at Moraviantown beside the Thames River. They're exhausted, hungry, but they may be able to use the terrain to their advantage.
That area is really kind of strategically important, according to Proctor, and Tecumseh agrees. The river on one side, and on the other side is a swamp area, and so you have the swamp area kind of acting as a natural kind of environment that would slow anybody down with heavy kind of undercoverage. And there's a road that comes from the west that Harrison has to move into in order to come into the area.
The natives under Tecumseh and his second-in-command, Ashwaubenon, occupied the right flank of the British position. The idea was that the British would throw back the American advance with a discharge, after which the natives would charge on the American flank and rout them. Things didn't work out that way.
Harrison attacks. His men pin the natives down, firing into the bush where Tecumseh's men have taken cover. Then he launches an unconventional attack on the British regulars.
What Harrison does is something really kind of strategically and really kind of cunning at the same time.
Instead of an infantry charge, the Americans conducted an unconventional charge of mounted cavalry, which broke the British line, leaving the native flank open.
Within the first 5 minutes of this final confrontation, the British troops maybe fire maybe 2 volleys, and then that's it. And even Henry Proctor retreats. Some warriors begin to desert. And so Tecumseh is really kind of disgusted 2 ways, with his own warriors, and even though the many are staying with them, but also with Henry Proctor, and he sees Henry Proctor riding off on horseback.
Tecumseh stays to fight. But the brilliant Shawnee leader is killed, and the dream of a unified Native nation dies with him.
Tecumseh is the Indian presence, and the warriors' effort, all their hopes, depends on Tecumseh, and now he's fallen. The war right there, and the War of 1812 for the Native nations and Tecumseh ends on the battlefield at the battles of Moraviantown.
First Nations warriors continue to fight with the British until the end of the war. But soon after the defeat at Moraviantown, 62 Native leaders sign an armistice with William Henry Harrison at Fort Detroit. Harrison goes on to become President of the United States. The lands of the Old Northwest remain in American control.
In folklore, Tecumseh stands out as a once and never king of the Indians. He stood for something that was important, but it was not to be.
This was a defining moment in world history of this planet, that what we are today as Canadian people, as Americans, as British, as people of the First Nations, all of that is defined by this one moment called the War of 1812.
Tecumseh never achieves his goal, but his legacy remains. Today, he is known as one of the greatest Native leaders of all time.
We love warriors. We love warriors because of their virtues, of what they're willing to do, and what they have done. And usually warriors die on the battlefield.
We will join with all the tribes, and we will rise as one man. Our lives are in the hands of the Great Spirit. We are determined to defend our lands, and if it is His will, we wish to leave our bones upon them.
Half Scottish, half Cherokee, former member of the British Army, Six Nations War Chief.
People of the Six Nations, I entreat you to hear me, for I'm a man of two worlds, yours and theirs.
2 centuries after the War of 1812, John Norton is still bathed in mystery.
John Norton is perhaps the most interesting, most controversial, and the least understood of all of the players in the War of 1812.
Without us, the British will lose this war. The Americans will take our land, and with it, our freedom. We must forget the defeats and betrayals of the past. Put your trust in me, and let us all join the fight.
More than a soldier, more than a hero, John Norton is a legend of the War of 1812. October 13th, 1812. 200 years ago, American troops were massing here on the shores of the Niagara River, ready to attack. Their target? The village of Queenston in Upper Canada, near Niagara Falls, a crucial staging area for further attacks on the Niagara Peninsula.
The American plan was to invade Canada.
The fledgling United States declares war to drive the British out of North America and force them to recognize American sovereignty. But so far, their army has been humiliated. They surrender Fort Mackinac on Lake Huron and Fort Detroit in Michigan without putting up any kind of fight. Today will be different.
It was a glorious day when the Americans hoisted the white flag over Fort Detroit. But now they approach our Canadian shores, and they seek vengeance.
I think the Americans felt that 1 or 2 quick strikes, it's all over.
American infantry crossed the river. From the steep embankment on the Canadian side, the British rained musket and cannon shot on the attackers. The Americans storm the cliffs over the Niagara River and capture a key British gun position. British commander Isaac Brock charges, trying to regain the cannon, but an American soldier puts a musket shot in his chest, killing the general. The British defenders are overwhelmed. They are losing the battle. Reinforcements from Fort George are on the march, but when will they arrive? All seems lost. Then, reinforcements arrive. Among them, 90 native warriors.
The natives use aimed, accurate fire, and they're causing considerable casualties amongst the Americans.
One of the Mohawk leaders is John Norton.
The Americans do not know the landscape hereabouts as we do. We knew there was another way to take the high ground.
It's a crucial moment. The future of Upper Canada could hinge on the success or failure of this counterattack.
First, we entered the woods, which were very thick. Then we divided into 5 or 6 files. Better to move quickly and remain hidden from our enemy. Then we climbed imperceptibly to the mountain's brow.
Norton and the native warriors circle up to the cliffs through a wooded ravine in hopes of surprising the Americans from the rear.
Norton had the courage and the foresight. And then the other thing that happens sometimes is what you might call battlefield magic.
There's no more formidable weapon in battle than surprise. We took the Americans from behind. The Americans fired on us with little effect. We shot from cover and pinned them down till reinforcements arrived.
It becomes a hand-to-hand battle. You can imagine some of the fighting that's quite horrific.
British reinforcements, regulars, and militia attack. Norton's warriors join the final assault.
They're using their war cries, which psychologically is damaging to the Americans because they're afraid of these people. They're convinced that if they're captured by a native, the native is going to rip their heart out and eat it.
Can you imagine being an American where you have two choices? Face these warriors or jump off the ravine? And many of them chose to jump.
The Americans try to escape, but their boats have left. John Norton's quick-thinking tactics at Queenston Heights have turned almost certain defeat into victory.
At Queenston Heights, John Norton demonstrated that he was a very good tactical leader. All right, his selection of the ground by using cover and then by attacking in the wood line was superlative.
But who was John Norton? 200 years after the war, people still wonder, who was he and what was he fighting for? Of all the heroes of 1812, John Norton remains the most enigmatic. The product of a Cherokee father and a Scottish mother, Norton spends a lifetime navigating the white and native worlds. Norton is born in Scotland in the 1760s. He arrives in North America in 1785 as a British soldier and is posted to Fort Niagara. Soon after his arrival, he leaves the army, becomes a teacher and a fur trader. He comes in contact with the Six Nations, learns Mohawk, and translates the Gospel of St. John. Then, while working as a translator for the Indian Department of Upper Canada, Norton meets an important Mohawk leader named Joseph Brant.
Well, they had developed a friendship very quickly. They had similar views towards Native relations with the British. They wanted to rebuild the alliance with the British.
Both very devout Christians, both have military agility. And so maybe John Norton was the son that Joseph Brant never really had.
Chief Brant is a strong and gallant leader. He gives his people pride in their true heritage and God-given destiny.
Brant is so impressed with Norton that he officially adopts him as a member of the Grand River Mohawk.
Brant, being a very astute politician, when he recognized somebody had a skill that he needed, he would get them close to him. And in our tradition, the best way to do that is to adopt somebody.
Brant also thinks Norton might be useful in land negotiations with the British.
I think Joseph Brant saw in Norton an ability to comprehend the other side and how to then use and manipulate that other side.
When Brant dies in 1807, Norton becomes an influential leader in one of Upper Canada's most important Aboriginal alliances, a group united as the Six Nations.
We call ourselves the Haudenosaunee, the people of the Longhouse. And that Longhouse covers the Confederacy of the Senecas, the Cayugas, the Onondagas, the Oneidas, and the Mohawks. I'm a Tuscarora. We joined the Confederacy in 1715.
Different languages, different ideas, different nations. But we all want the same thing, the freedom to live here on our land.
Norton and the Six Nations have a lot to offer the British. Britain does not have enough troops in North America to win the war alone. The Six Nations can provide warriors.
The British liked working with us only because we had the military ability to put our law into action, but they also liked the idea if we talk to the Six Nations, then they talk to other people.
But around the council fires of the Six Nations, many still need convincing.
There was a great debate going on within our people, between the women, the chiefs, and the warriors, about should we pick up the hatchet one more time, head down the war trail to defend their crown, or should we stay neutral?
The way the warrior society was structured, it's not like a military regiment where the commanding officer says, okay, men, time to go. You know, they stand to attention and march off with them. Here you had to convince them that they should go off and support the British. And it was not considered a loss of faith if you said, no, I don't want to go.
I will make my brothers of the Six Nations see the great advantage of an alliance with the British. It's our best hope for negotiation of land and for freedom.
Norton needs every ounce of his talent for persuasion. His audience is skeptical. The British failed to protect Six Nations land during the American Revolution.
So there were some factions within the various Native communities that believed in neutrality. Let's just not support either side and see what's going to happen. Others said, let's support the British or work with the British, and hopefully, if we can be successful with them, they'll remember us and give us our homelands.
Norton hopes cooperation with the British military is the best option and brings that message to the council fires of the Six Nations.
Norton had the ability to say, what kind of man are you? Are you going to sit back and let somebody else do your fighting, or are you going to stand up and defend your family? If you're that kind of man, follow me. If you're not, then get out of the way. So he was very forceful, and I think some of the young men who wanted to fight really liked that.
1813, Norton and his men are stationed near the British stronghold of Fort George. The British have trounced the Americans in Detroit and Queenston, but the Americans are determined to turn the tide. They need to claim territory in Upper Canada to drive the British out. Fort George is now a target. On May 25th, 1813, the Americans rain artillery on Fort George. The fort is destroyed. 2 days later, the Americans invade. The tide of war is about to change.
The enemy set upon us with heavy guns from their boats on the lake. Hundreds of their troops disembarked at the mouth of the river. They would give no quarter.
4,000 American infantrymen, warships on the lake. Cannon and musket shots fall like rain. The British are hopelessly outnumbered, with just 1,000 regulars and 200 militia. As the battle continues, the number of Norton's warriors dwindles.
Many of my men must hunt to provide sustenance for their families. But with each dawn, I find fewer warriors in my camp. But even in these times of hardship and want, I must make them see the future of their lands lies with the British.
Through sheer force of personality, Norton manages to hang on to a few battle-hardened warriors.
Towards the end of the war, I think the women had a bigger say in determining whether the young men were going to pick up the tomahawk and head down the war trail because the losses were mounting. They were in fear that our whole community here at Grand River would get wiped out.
The British decide to give up Fort George. Cracks in the alliance widen further.
When the British withdrew from Fort George back to Burlington Heights, this sent a signal to the natives. The British are withdrawing. They're giving up territory. Who's going to control this territory? Will it be the Americans, or are we going to have to deal with some new masters?
Yet again, Norton's persuasive powers are put to the test.
People of the Six Nations cannot fall back now. We've come this far with our brothers, the Redcoats, and we've won their respect. They will repay our loyalty with land. We must stand and fight.
On June 5th, an American army determined to destroy the British position at Burlington Heights stops for the night at Stony Creek, now part of modern-day Hamilton. That night, the British make a preemptive strike. They launch a bayonet attack against the unsuspecting Americans. Advanced scouts give the British the advantage of surprise. They drive gaps into the American lines. The Americans are forced to fall back.
The Americans beat such a hasty retreat. They left behind cannons and munitions. Now we will give no quarter.
The British drive the Americans all the way back to Fort George. The fort becomes a defensive position. For 6 months, British and Six Nations forces lay siege to the occupied fort. Norton personally leads repeated raids and attacks on American positions outside the fort. What was once a prize is now their prison. On December 10th, the Americans abandon Fort George, burning Niagara as they retreat.
The Americans can no longer bear our repeated harassments. Fort George is ours again.
Capturing Fort George comes at a cost. Fighting was fierce, and the American forces included Native allies.
These fights were so fierce that it immediately created some tension within the minds of even the warriors. Like, why are we killing our relatives? It's one thing to kill the evil empire, the Americans. It's another thing then to say, we're killing each other. And so the viciousness of the fight was necessary to survive the battle, but the consequences of seeing your dead relatives laying on the ground because of what you did, that got to even the fiercest warrior.
After the hard-fought victories at Stony Creek and Fort George, Norton's reputation among the British is at a high point. But the Six Nations are losing the will to fight, and the War of 1812 is far from over.
The warriors finally decided enough's enough. We're defending a king we never met, we're making promises he'll never keep, and we're spilling the blood of our relatives on the ground.
(1814). In European circles, John Norton is more powerful than ever.
Sir George Prevost, Governor General of all British North America, has confirmed my rank as captain of all Confederate Indians. Now no one can stand in my way.
But the war is still raging. The Americans are once again on the offensive. This year, they are better trained, hardened by 2 years of battles, and desperate for a victory. On July 3rd, 1814, the Americans launch an attack across the Niagara River. Fort Erie is captured. 2 days later, British and Native forces are driven back at the Battle of Chippewa. The American advances hurt Native morale. Despite his powers of persuasion, John Norton is losing warriors.
John Norton would use various methods in order to keep natives with him. He would speak to them. He would make speeches to the collected group. He would go visit the communities and talk to their leaders and try to get them to come with him. He would go see the British and try to secure various supplies that he could offer as an emolument to come into battle. So he was always, working on various methods of trying to get warriors to come to the front. And this was something that was going on all the time, and it's something he's got to work at continually.
We have achieved too much to let the Americans take our land away. Warriors of the Six Nations must fight on with the British.
In July 1814, Norton leads several raiding parties, harassing the Americans, keeping them off balance. But the British Army has finally received reinforcements from Europe. Natives are playing less and less of a role in the war.
And the difficulty was, over time, his credibility began to decline with the Native community as they began to see their fortunes in North America waning. And because of that, in the eyes of the British Army, his credibility was declining as well.
July 25th, 1814. Norton and his warriors are about to be part of the bloodiest fight of the entire war. It happens at Lundy's Lane, in what is now Niagara Falls, Canada. Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, General Gordon Drummond, takes personal command of the British Army.
The Battle of Lundy's Lane in the summer of 1814 is a fascinating battle. It's the largest battle that's fought in the Northern Theater in the War of 1812. It's interesting as well in that it's fought principally at night.
We took our position on the high ground, on the flank of the British heavy artillery. We were ready.
Because the warriors were still such a powerful military tool, even a handful could make a big difference. So Norton had the hardcore left with him at the end of the war and at Lundy's Lane.
The battle began about 7:15 in the evening. The British had hastily occupied a hill that was just close to the main north-south road, the Portage Road going around the Niagara Falls. An American brigade exits from a wood line, and for about an hour, there's a skirmish between the two. The British are in a very good position.
The Americans take heavy casualties. Then a second American division arrives. A counterattack is launched. Now the British bodies begin to pile.
I've never seen the Americans fight like this before. General Drummond was wounded. On the battlefield, confusion reigned, with companies and detachments mixed together in the same line. Many men on both sides were slaughtered.
At midnight, the British commander decides to call it off. He withdraws to the west of the battlefield. Expecting the action to continue the next day, he shows up the next morning. The Americans are gone.
The American withdrawal is a stroke of luck. Both sides have more than 1,000 men dead or wounded. The British still have 1,400 men on the field, but they're in no condition to continue the fight.
The dead are on the field and on the road. Grass is red with blood, but the Americans are in retreat. We have won.
The Battle of Lundy's Lane was one of the bloodiest battles of the War of 1812 and one of the deadliest ever fought on Canadian soil. It was also a key victory. Outnumbered after their heavy losses, the Americans withdraw to Fort Erie.
The battle was bloody and terrible, but the Americans know our resolve. This is our land, and they will not take it.
The threat of invasion to Upper Canada has been all but wiped out. Peace negotiations are underway. On December 24th, the Treaty of Ghent is signed, declaring an end to the War of 1812. After the war, exhausted from years of combat and the constant struggle to keep his native alliance together, Norton leaves Grand River and the Six Nations. Over time, whatever influence the Aboriginal Alliance had won in the war began to fade away.
Both sides, when it came to dealing with the natives in the treaty, really forgot about them.
Among the people of the Six Nations, as well as historians of the War of 1812, John Norton is a legend. But is he a hero?
John Norton is an outside agitator. He came among the Haudenosaunee, stirred the pot, was responsible for causing a lot of distress and agony among our people. But at the same time, he rallied our people to make a very vigorous defense for our interests, our land and our people. So like all historic figures, he has this dual-edged legacy.
After the war, Norton publishes his journal, one of the most complete accounts of the War of 1812. In 1823, he suspects his wife has been unfaithful. Norton kills a man in a duel and is found guilty of manslaughter. Soon after, John Norton disappears from all historical record. It is rumored that he dies in northern Mexico in 1831.
I will always be a proud war chief of the Grand River Mohawk, but also I will always be a proud servant of my sovereign in Great Britain. God save the king.
(1812). The Americans and British are at war, and much of that war is played out on the Atlantic Ocean. Enos Collins, a Halifax naval merchant, sees a chance to make a difference in the war and to make some money.
Enos Collins is a masterful opportunist. He's always looking, for opportunities that other people don't see.
Enos Collins renames a former slave trading ship the Liverpool Packet and licenses her as a privateer.
Privateering is a very regulated form of warfare. Sometimes people call it legalized piracy.
Seizing American ships makes Collins the richest man in Canada. And in the Atlantic theater, it also makes him a legend. (1812). Britain and the United States are at war. On the east coast of North America, a sleek clipper ship named the Liverpool Packet launches an attack from a secluded cove. Its target? An American trading vessel full of rich cargo. The merchant vessel tries to outrun her. The clipper is lightning fast. She fires a cannon. The merchant surrenders. Another victim of one of the most successful privateers of all time.
Privateer is not a pirate, I have to make that perfectly clear. Privateers were kind of like naval auxiliaries, if you wanted. Their job was to stop enemy shipping. And they did that, firstly, as, of course, their loyal and patriotic duty, but they were also entitled to the ship and the cargo. So that was pretty nearly the major motivation.
Stopping enemy shipping was very important in 1812. Britain is at war with Napoleon. They needed to prevent anyone from supplying their enemy, and they need sailors for their navy.
Because Britain ruled the seas at that period in time, they were entitled to stop any ship they wanted and take off, presumably British nationals. The British were just lifting these people off the ships, no questions asked. The Americans lost literally thousands of men off their ships, and they were impressed into the British service.
But at that time, most of the nations in the world did not accept the idea of naturalization to another country. They felt that if you were born in a jurisdiction, you remained liable to serve in the armies and navies of that jurisdiction. So someone could have been born in Wales, moved to the United States when they were 7 years old, but were still considered liable to serve King George.
And Americans just hated this. They'd fought a revolution all about freedom, and the idea of their sailors being hauled off into British tyranny just outraged them. And it became a big simmering issue that really helped light the flames for the War of 1812.
The Americans declare war on the British in the summer of 1812, in part to end impressment. The British and Americans clash in Michigan, southern Ontario, along the shores of the Great Lakes, Richelieu, Detroit, Niagara, and the St. Lawrence Rivers, and on the Atlantic coast. The British have the largest and most powerful navy in the world, but almost all of it is in Europe chasing Napoleon. They maintain only a small squadron in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
The British have a very skilled army, but they've got to supply it from a thousands and thousands of miles long supply chain. And keeping that army in the field is just vital. The ability to control the ocean, to defend your supply line and your home turf, and then to sort of bring the war to the Americans is incredibly important.
The Royal Navy needs help if it is to secure the Atlantic, to help enforce an embargo on American trade after the Americans declare war. The British license local mariners to seize American merchant ships on their way to Europe. The British hope these privateers can shut down American trade and cripple the young republic's ability to wage war.
They had this magic document called a letter of marque, which was a license to set up your private navy.
Enos Collins is just the man for this job, and he started working towards this even before war was declared.
Enos Collins was the eldest son, number 2 of 26 children, not all in the same mother. His family lived in Liverpool, Nova Scotia. Obviously, with all those children, they were fairly poor. He didn't go to university, he didn't go to school. I don't think he probably had high school or the equivalent in that period. But he was fairly smart, obviously, and he was probably a cabin boy on one of his father's ships at age 11 or so. So he had a pretty early introduction to the sea. By 19, he was the first lieutenant on a privateer in the Caribbean in the war between France and England. And so he sort of got his chops there.
As war clouds are gathering in 1809, 1810, he can see that war is going to happen with the Americans. So he starts shopping around for a good, fast, sneaky little privateer schooner.
So I was at an auction right here in Halifax when I found the perfect ship. And I could tell just by looking at her, she was fast.
The Royal Navy has captured a ship called the Severn, and now they are trying to find a buyer. The ship is being crudely dubbed the Black Joke by skeptics. A slave smuggling schooner, the boat gets almost no bidders in the auction. Collins sees value in the ship. Called a Baltimore Clipper, it's built with a new design.
It was a design that evolved with smugglers and slave traders working out of Baltimore in the United States, and they dramatically changed the nature of hulls. This thing was sort of as narrow as an arrow, and with dramatic masts that tilted backwards. They're called rake masts, and they were ideal privateer vessels. They could go very quickly, they could kind of vanish.
When he first bought the Liverpool packet, people were sort of, oh, what kind of a ship is that? It's no good for trade, the hull's too small.
When people ask me why I bought her, I said maybe I'll just use her as a, as a mail packet.
In the months before the war, Collins uses the schooner to deliver mail between Halifax and Liverpool. But when the war breaks out, the Liverpool packet is assigned a more lucrative task.
The real reason he bought it was he's just waiting for war to break out. And then this little vessel with, 5 guns will be the perfect thing to round up American merchant ships. So that's classic Enos Collins, seeing an opportunity where other people don't.
On June 18th, 1812, the Americans declare war. Enos Collins is ready. The Liverpool packet is crewed up with 40 men. They're issued 40 cutlasses and 25 muskets. The ship is armed with 5 cannons, including Shiny Sam, a long-range 6-pounder designed to intimidate.
And he starts capturing ships almost right away, and they start snapping up prizes left, right, and center.
His big hunting ground was Cape Cod. Because it's sort of that long, curving stretch, he had quite a field to operate in, and there was a lot of shipping traffic back and forth. The skill to privateering was to capture the best prize you could find without any damage to yourself or the prize. If you shoot up the prize, then that lowers the value, possibly damages the cargo, reduces your profits.
her goal was generally to get very close, very fast. And once you get within range of the 6-pounder, you send one shot across the bow, and all these ferocious men are waving their cutlasses and lining the rails, and any merchant captain knows that, you know, it's not worth men dying for the price of a cargo, and they very quickly surrender.
Now, the best targets are the big, fat, slow merchant ships with plenty of rich cargo. They have few guns and even less appetite for a fight.
The Liverpool packet captures an astonishing 9 ships on her first expedition. In the months to follow, she captures dozens more. The Liverpool packet becomes a notorious predator, public enemy #1 to New England traders. The United States has also issued letters of marque to American mariners.
Now more than ever, we have to be careful. Trouble could come with success like this.
The War of 1812 rages on land and sea. The British have asked privateers to shut down American trade. This would severely damage the young country's ability to wage war. Halifax privateer Enos Collins answers the call. His ship, the Liverpool packet, captures dozens of American cargo vessels.
We encounter little resistance on our expeditions. My crew has already captured 12 ships worth of cargo. Cargo the enemy no longer has. The risks are great, but if the Vice Admiralty holds to their promise, then we will be rich men for our ventures.
When a prize was turned over to the privateer and sold, the owners and the backers of the privateer got half the money, and the crew and the captain got the other half. A successful privateer could make thousands of dollars. So there are records of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 being turned over in one prize, sometimes more.
When captured ships are auctioned off, Enos Collins and his investors net thousands of dollars per captured boat, a far cry from the $70 a year a British soldier would make. Collins' shrewd awareness of markets allows him to maximize the spoils of war. He sells confiscated barrels of flour, coffee, beans, spirits, and wine for enormous profits.
Madeira, aged. Very nice.
In 1813, privateering reaches its peak. More than 20 Canadian vessels bombard American shipping.
Liverpool packet had been making these daring captures one after another along the American coast, and the American papers are just full of outrage that this treacherous northern interloper is capturing American ships.
Collins and the Liverpool packet become a notorious enemy of New England shipping. In Boston, Salem, and Portsmouth, traders are outraged. The newspapers of New England seethe with frustration.
The Americans can hardly believe our successes. Listen here. That an insignificant fishing schooner should be suffered to capture and carry home in triumph 8 or 9 sailor vessels would seem utterly incredible.
It's a devastating psychological blow. The idea that this little schooner would come right within, a mile of their coastline, sneak into their harbors, capture ships, right off their big metropolises is just devastatingly insulting.
As the anger builds in the Americans, the Liverpool packet goes from the hunter to the hunted.
The merchants in Cape Cod in particular sent out several privateers, privately funded, get 70 volunteers and leap into a ship and rush off and try and capture the Liverpool packet.
Trouble arrives while most of the Liverpool packet's crew is away, shipping home bounty from a recent capture.
In 1813, maybe once too often to the well, a very large American privateer called the Thomas manages to sort of catch the Liverpool packet with the wind not in her favor.
The Liverpool packet is in trouble. The ship is cornered by the American privateer off the coast of Cape Cod.
There was almost no one left on the packet. So many men were off the ship sending prizes in.
The crew jettison their smaller cannons to gain speed. The only gun remaining on the ship is Shawnee Sam, their 6-pounder. But gunmen have used up all the ship's 6-pound shot. Cannonballs come nearer and nearer to the ship's hull. One punctures the ship's sails. A mild June breeze recedes. The Liverpool packet is pinned as the Thomas closes in.
She found herself unable to run this much bigger ship that had, 3 times the crew and 4 times their armament that she had aboard. And once the big American privateer drew within cannon range and started shooting, the Liverpool packet realized they couldn't shoot their way free from this.
After a 5-hour chase, the Liverpool packet and the Thomas come to broadsides. There's an exchange of gunfire, and the Liverpool packet surrenders.
Now, as the two ships drew together, there was a bit of confusion. The big American ship slammed into the side of the Liverpool packet, and they were trying to save their vessel from being crushed. And the Americans thought, oh boy, they're starting to fight again. And then fighting broke out again, and there were actually a number of men killed on both sides in this accidental battle.
But the fight is over. The Liverpool packet is defeated. 5 of her crew are killed. News of the capture reaches Enos Collins in Halifax.
One of my best captains, Captain Joseph Bars, is now in the hands of the U.S. Marshals. We spread our crew too thin. Now my men are in enemy hands. I must get them back.
The Liverpool packet, the most successful Canadian privateer, is in the hands of its captors, American privateers. Its crew is taken ashore by U.S. Marshals.
In Portsmouth, because the packet had angered Americans so much, the people in the town lined the streets as they marched Bars and his crew up the hill. They hissed, they booed, they threw things. They cheered that he was captured. This was, completely unheard of in privateering captures. And then he was sent to jail on bread and water. He was treated extremely meanly by the people in Portsmouth because he had been such a hazard to shipping along the coast.
Now, as privateers, her men are all prisoners of war. They should be treated just like naval prisoners. But the Americans hated the captain of the Liverpool packet, Joseph Bars Jr. They didn't want to let him go. The Americans didn't want this guy chasing their ships again, so they kept him in irons for a year, treated him very poorly, broke all the rules about prisoner exchange.
Enos Collins was very concerned, first because he had lost the ship, and secondly because Bars had been so badly treated. Enos Collins actually wrote to the Lieutenant Governor.
Captain Joseph Bars has served the king aboard my schooner, the Liverpool packet, for many months. Under a letter of marque, we have conducted our affairs honorably. Now, my friend and colleague is a prisoner of the Republic. I beg you to use your influence to arrange for his immediate release. Dutifully yours, Enos Collins.
Governor Sherbrooke reminded the Americans that, you're always complaining about your prisoners of war being mistreated by the British. Here's a Nova Scotian hero. So eventually they managed to convince the Americans to at least, take the leg cuffs and handcuffs off. Bars, manages to save himself by taking advantage of that and escapes.
Captain Joseph Bars flees to Nova Scotia. He never commands a privateering expedition again. 4 months after its capture, Enos Collins finds his beloved Liverpool packet at a Halifax auction. it's being recaptured by Canadian privateers. Collins buys the ship back and returns it to service as a privateer. But by the time the Liverpool packet is back at sea in service of Enos Collins, times have changed. In Europe, Britain's war with France is winding down. The Navy sends her ships to create a powerful blockade that keeps American boats in port.
By the end of the war, they're raiding freely up and down the American coast, able to attack any city that they want, and the Americans are helpless to defend even their own capital.
In 1814, with full control of the Atlantic, Admiral Cochrane of the Royal Navy selects an American community for destruction. He chooses Washington, the nation's capital. The raid is a huge success. The White House is set ablaze. Soon, the Americans begin to look for an exit from the war. With the Napoleonic Wars over, the British no longer need to search American ships for deserters. The British end their practice of impressment. In Ghent on Christmas Eve 1814, after a bloody two-year war, the Americans and British agree to peace. The British occupy much of Maine, and the Americans hold some of southern Ontario at the end of the war. But the Treaty of Ghent restores the borders to their original place. The border between Canada and the United States becomes the longest undefended border on the planet. Trade between the two countries flourishes.
Enos Collins leaves the War of 1812 a very rich and successful and ambitious man. One of the first banks in Canada, Halifax Banking Company, which is created by Collins and his partners in 1825, and eventually evolves to one of the fathers of the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce. All from this really swashbuckling merchant entrepreneur who makes his mark in the War of 1812. You would think that a man like Enos Collins, who made so much money out of capturing the Americans and taking their ships and cargo, would be very unpopular. But because of this long-standing business relationship, when peace comes, he is trading and making money with American investors and partners like you wouldn't believe. When he sets up his bank in 1825, he sends, a sort of a very young bank clerk down to Boston to learn how to do banking, and he's dealing with the same merchant firms whose ships he was capturing, and they're quite happy to say, oh yeah, here's how you run a successful bank. We'll give you ledger books, and so he transcends national animosities because he's very good at making money for everyone. And I think that's one of the key things about Collins. He's a bit of a hard bargain driver, but if you can make money successfully with him, he'll do business with all kinds of people.
There's peace on the Atlantic again, and that's good for trade. And what's good for trade is good for Canada.